The following is a video presentation of Crossroads Bible Church, San Jose, California.
All right, so we are going to get into the fourth chapter of Ruth. And you know, if you've been here for the last 3 weeks, we're calling this a little love story. And what a fantastic piece of literature. All the commentators agree that nobody's really sure who wrote Ruth. Some people think it was Solomon. There's some problems with that theory. Other people think it's David. There's problems with that theory as well. Nobody knows who wrote it. But we do know is that whoever wrote it was a just literary genius. This book, it's two pages probably in your Bible. It's remarkably short, but it is beautifully written. It is one of the most wonderful love stories in all of history. And if you've been out over the last couple of weeks, you know that it's a little love story between an immigrant girl named Ruth and a wealthy Israelite named Boaz, but it's really a big story, a big love story. And Ruth has a couple of themes in it, but one of the biggest ones is really showing us what God's love for us is like so that we can emulate it. I'm going to read the passage on which the teaching is based. It's Ruth chapter 4, and that's going to be on page 225 in your Bible. You go to the book of Judges, turn to the right. We're going to read the passage on which the teaching is based, then I'll get into it. The words will be on the screen behind me, and there should be a Bible somewhere in the seat, under the seat in front if you'd like to follow along. Ruth chapter 4. Meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate and sat there. When the kinsman redeemer he had mentioned came along, Boaz said, "Come over here, my friend, and sit down." So he went over and sat down. Boaz took 10 of the elders of the town and said, Sit here, and they did so. Then he said to the kinsman redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our brother Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me, so I will know. For no one has the right to do it except you. I am next in line." "I will redeem it," he said. Then Boaz said, "On the day you buy the land from Naomi and from Ruth the Moabitess, you acquire the dead man's widow in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property." At this, the kinsman redeemer said, "Then I cannot redeem it because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it." Now, in earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off his sandal and gave it to the other. This was the method of legalizing transactions in Israel. So the kinsman redeemer said to Boaz, "Buy it yourself." And he removed his sandal. Then Boaz announced to the elders and all the people, "Today you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Kilion, and Malon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabitess, Malon's widow, as my wife in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from the town records. Today you are witnesses." Then the elders and all those at the gate said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, who Tamar bore to Judah." So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. Then he went into her, and the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The woman said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a kinsman redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth." Then Naomi took the child, laid him in her lap, and cared for him. The woman living there said, "Naomi has a son," and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. This, then, is the family line of Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron. Hezron was the father of Ram. Ram, the father of Amminadab. Amminadab, the father of Nahshon. Nahshon, the father of Salmon. Salmon, the father of Boaz. Boaz, the father of Obed. Obed, the father of Jesse. And Jesse, the father of David. This is the word of the Lord. the story starts. I'll do a little recap here. The story starts when there's a famine in the land. There's a famine in Bethlehem. The word Bethlehem means the house of bread. So apparently there's no bread in the house of bread. And so Elimelech, whose name means the Lord is God, takes his family and they travel, they sojourn to the east to the land of Moab. You can read in Genesis how Lot had an incestuous relationship with one of his daughters, and the descendants of that incestuous relationship became the Moabites. Moabites were the bitter enemies of Israel, right? So what happens is Elimelech goes, and you hear that they're in the land of Moab, and Elimelech dies. And their two sons, Mahlon and Chilion, die. And all of a sudden, the story pivots, and it becomes about this widow named Naomi. Naomi, the name Naomi means pleasant. And she goes back to Israel, and she brings one of her daughters-in-law with her. Now, these two daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah, these are Moabite women. They're on the way back, and Naomi says, you know what? You shouldn't come with me. This is a horrible idea. You should go back because you're still young. You can still have heirs. You can still remarry. Go back to Moab. Go be with your own culture. Be with your own people. Try to build a life. If you go with me, you'll be destitute. You're going to be foreigners. You'll be immigrants. Naomi has no prospects for a future. Right? If you were here over the last couple of weeks, you know that in that time, in that place, in a traditional society, if you didn't have sons, if you didn't have a family, you were destitute. That was your resume. That was your stock portfolio. That was your retirement plan. And she has nothing. And not only that, we find out through the story that she's too old to remarry and have children. She is without hope. One of the daughters-in-law says, well, what you're saying makes a lot of sense, so I'm going to go back. The other daughter, Ruth, says, where you go, I will go. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. And there I will die and be buried, and may the Lord deal ever so severely with me if I break this vow. Probably some of the kindest and sweetest words ever spoken. And if you go to a wedding, that verse will pop up over and over again. That's one of those famous ones that finds its way into weddings because it's so beautiful and it's so endearing to so many people. And then, so Ruth takes on the economic security of this little non-traditional family. They're immigrants, they're sojourners, they're coming back, they have nothing. And you remember what Naomi says? She says, don't call me Naomi anymore, call me Mara. I'm bitter. The word Mara means bitter. The Lord has dealt severely with me. So she's lost everything. Her suffering is manifold. She's spiritually, economically, and socially marginalized. And this young woman gives up everything, gives up her future, gives up any hope she had to follow her mother-in-law back to Israel to provide for her. And then we find out that Ruth goes and gleans in the field. This was God's welfare plan. He said, when you harvest your crops, don't harvest all the way to the edge of your field. Leave the edges of your field unharvested so that the poor can glean there. We find out that this could have been dangerous for Ruth. In fact, and we also see that she just happened into the field of a man named Boaz. This is the writer's way of saying this wasn't an accident. This was providence. This was the Lord directing. And so she happens into the field of a man named Boaz, who's a wealthy man, and he sees this Moabite woman, and he hears of the tremendous kindness that she did for her mother-in-law. And it so impresses him that he provides protection and provision for her. He says, don't go to another field, you'll be in danger. And in fact, don't even go glean with the people gleaning in this field, because they might hurt you somehow. Instead, glean with my working women, and I will tell all of my men, hey, leave her alone. So she all of a sudden comes under the umbrella of this man Boaz's protection. And she has this incredible harvest of barley she takes back to her mother-in-law, and she's blown away. What happened? How did you end up with all this barley? And she says, a man named Boaz showed me kindness. And then all of a sudden, Naomi, who is destitute, who is downtrodden, who has absolutely had all of her dreams just completely blown up, turns on a dime. She goes from being this depressed, and you can kind of see her hanging in the margins. When Ruth says, I'm going to go glean in the field, she's like, sure, go do whatever you want. All of a sudden, she's got wind in her sails again. She's incredibly excited, and she says, Boaz, he's one of our kinsmen redeemers. And if you're really interested, you can go read Leviticus 25, and you can find out all about the kinsman redeemer. And this was God's way of providing for people who had fallen on hard times. See, you can go read in Joshua how when the Israelites came into the land, they broke up the land, they divided among families. And see, God knew that because of the tumultuousness of life, that some of these families were going to fall on hard times, and some of them were going to fall into debt and lose this land. And God provided two ways for families that had fallen on hard times to get their land back, to get their inheritance back. And one was the year of Jubilee. So every 50 years, if you gave up your ancestral land, the land that had been promised to you in the scriptures, every 50 years it would go back. And then God also provides a second way for this to happen. If there is somebody in your family, your clan, it was usually the wealthy senior male in the family, this extended families, was the kinsman redeemer. That's the Hebrew word goel. Everybody say goel. Right? So you've got God's kind of reparations for the poor, his plan for families that fell on hard times. He did not want his people to be characterized by a disproportionate distribution of wealth. He said there's going to be mechanisms in my law for returning these lands to people who lost them. And then we see this is exactly what Boaz does. Now, this kinsman redeemer, there's not just one in the story. And this is the important takeaway from Ruth chapter 4. There's at least three. There's three kinsman redeemers in this story. There's a formal kinsman redeemer, and there's a hidden kinsman redeemer, and then there's the real kinsman redeemer. So let's take a look. The story starts with death. It starts with famine, and it ends with a marriage and a baby and an heir and redemption. It's beautiful, and it's all because, firstly, the formal redeemer, and that's Boaz. That's Boaz. Now, a couple of things that are remarkable about Boaz. He sees something in Ruth. He hears what's been said about her. This woman has shown one of his clansmen, Naomi, this incredible kindness. And he is so moved by it that when Ruth shows up on the threshing floor and says, "Will you redeem me? Will you marry me?" He says, "I'm going to do everything that you ask because I saw something in you that was remarkable and lovely and holy and beautiful." He's moved by Ruth. He's moved by, it takes us a little while to kind of fill in the gaps in the story, how she was taking her life in her hands, as she was giving up her hope and a future and sacrificing everything for her mother-in-law. And then Boaz sees this, and he's absolutely blown away by it. He says, there's something special about this woman. But we find out that redeeming Naomi and redeeming Ruth is going to be very costly. And how do we know that? There's another guy in the story. Apparently, there's another redeemer. There's another kinsman redeemer who's closer in line and has kind of first rights of refusal on this proposal. And initially, the guy's like, "Oh yeah, I'll buy the land." And then he finds out that there's a girl that comes with it, and he's like, "You know what? I'm good. I can't." Because why? It's going to endanger his inheritance. See, what happens when the kinsman redeemer redeems a piece of land, and he redeems a situation like this, he's redeeming the name of the dead man. Elimelech. So not only does he have to now pay for the land, it doesn't become a part of his inheritance. It goes back to the line of Elimelech, so Naomi would have an inheritance. Do you see? It costs Boaz quite a bit to do this. And not only that, he gets Ruth with the deal. Now, we read it in the margins. He's pretty smitten with Ruth, it looks like. But Ruth is a Moabitess. Sounds like a disease, doesn't it? That's kind of how it's painted in the text. You can go to Deuteronomy 23, and it says, somebody from Moab, not allowed to enter the temple for 10 generations. They were the bitter enemies of Israel. We've been talking about for the last 4 weeks how the Moabites worshipped a false god by the name of Chemosh, and he was this really, you can Google it later. They have these huge altars where they would build fires, and they would sacrifice infants in the fires, and it's like a giant cow god, if you will. And so really reprehensible, hedonistic, horrible stuff. No good Jew wanted to be in Moab, but that's exactly what Elimelech did with his family. He said, we're going over here. And just a little side note, it's usually the men in the family that kind of give up It's usually the men in the family that say, you know what? God's not blessing us. I'm good. I'm not going to church. I'm going to stay home and watch the playoffs. And that's exactly what Elimelech does. He says, there's a famine in the land, and I'm not trusting God to provide or bring an end to the famine, even though that's exactly what he does in the story. His faithlessness is juxtaposed to Ruth's faith in this story. And so they go to Moab, and the exact thing that they feared, that they were trying to escape, right? Their death is exactly what finds them. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So Boaz accepts her proposal. He pays her debt. And immediately, this is important, not only does he pay the debt, right? We're a little unsure based on the text whether the land had already been sold or whether they had borrowed against the land and now that money had to be repaid. But he pays the debt. But not only that, in that moment, as soon as they're married, everything that he has becomes hers. Not only does he pay the debt, but now she's entitled to an inheritance. Do you see? Not only is it paid for, her stars are changed forever and ever and ever. Do you see? Boaz looks a lot like Jesus. Now, that's the first redeemer. That's the formal redeemer. But there's ambiguity in the text. You see, the writer's done something very intentional here, and I'm going to make you look at it. There's a hidden redeemer. There's a hidden redeemer. You're going to notice, principally, that the book is not the book of Boaz. It's the book of Ruth. It's the book of Ruth. In verse 16, it says, 15, praise be to the Lord. He has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel, and he will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, he's talking to Naomi, who loves you, who is better than 7 sons, has given him birth. I tell you what, the reason we're not all getting goosebumps is because we don't live in a traditional society. If we lived in a traditional society, 7 sons? Oh my God, I got 4 sons. I can't imagine what 7 sons is like. But we're in a modern society. Kids are just like vacuous holes of resources and dreams, right? You know, they'll spend all your money and time on them. It was quite the opposite in the ancient world. We've just talked about how if you had sons, that was the best thing ever because sons provided security, they provided labor, they provided heirs, they provided children, they would carry on your name, it was your resume, it was your stock portfolio. And not only that, in the scripture, 7 is a number that represents perfection. This is better than the perfect family. So wait a second. This immigrant woman, this Moabitess who has nothing, she's poor, she's homeless, she's as poor as you get, she's gleaning in the fields. She's better than 7 sons. She is better than 7 sons. Do you see this? And the person who's articulating this doesn't get a name in the story. This is like a nurse or something like that, just hanging in the margins. So this is common knowledge. Everybody in the community, everybody saw her come back, saw Naomi come back just destitute and downcast. And they saw this young immigrant woman come back with her, and they all noticed, oh my goodness, she's given up everything. She's become an immigrant. She became poor. She's laying her life on the line. She's putting herself in danger. We find out that there's a threat of violence or rape. And she's doing that for somebody just because she loves her. Not for what she can get out of it. Not because it kind of massages her ego somehow to do it, but because she loves her. It says, don't urge me to leave you. This is in Ruth chapter 1. Where you go, I will die. Where you go, I will go and die. Now, when my great-grandparents immigrated to the United States from Italy, back in the early, the 20s, I think, they came through Ellis Island. They left eastern Sicily, and they got on a boat, and they made it all the way to Ellis Island. And why? Because of the promise of a better life. And that's the story of almost everybody in this room. Unless there's some Native Americans here. If your family came here for something, and this is the reason people immigrate. You're leaving a bad situation for what you hope to become a better situation. Ruth left what could have been a promising situation for a situation that was absolutely hopeless. And she did it because she cared so deeply about her mother-in-law, Naomi. She expected a worse life, not a better life. And then what does she say? This is interesting. In Ruth chapter 1, she says, may the Lord deal with me ever so severely. When you read in your Bible and you see like in the Old Testament, you see a capital L and a small O-R-D, that's usually the formal name of God, Elohim. God has a lot of names in the Old Testament. The word that's translated here is the tetragram. It's Yod-He, Vav-He. This is what we'll pronounce Yahweh. This is the personal, covenantal name of God. This is the family name of God. If you're one of God's children, this is how you would refer to him. And that's the name that she invokes, this personal, familial name. And she never would have said that if she didn't believe in God and his grace. She was, in a very real sense, converted through Naomi, through her witness, through her character, somehow. But there's two redeemers in this story, at least two. The first one, Boaz, you have this wealthy landowner who protects and covers this poor, hopeless immigrant. And then not only does he pay the debt, she's now entitled to an inheritance, and her stars are changed forever. And there's the other redeemer, the hidden redeemer, and that's Ruth. She left the relative comfort and safety of her home, and she became a foreigner in a foreign land. At the threat of death or serious injury, she took on the economic security for this little non-traditional family. She gave up any hope she had of a future and laid her life down for someone else. Does that sound like anybody you know? And that brings us to the greater redeemer. The greater redeemer, and this is who the book of Ruth is truly about. Now let's just review really quick what we've learned so far through this book. We've learned a couple of things. Friendship, most powerful thing in the world. Most powerful thing in the world. Whatever you're into, you're going to do better at it. You're going to whether it's a noble thing or an ignoble thing, you're going to excel at it more if you do it with friends. Okay? If you're a fisherman, you got fishing buddies, you'll probably catch more fish as a result of that. They'll drag you out of bed at 5 in the morning. You know, you'll just catch more fish. If your thing is working out and you've got a group of friends that you work out with, you'll hold each other accountable and you'll get more exercise. You'll accomplish your goals to a greater degree when you do it with people. Friendship is the most powerful thing in the world. And if you don't have friends, you're not going to grow. You're not going to grow. And you think about it. This is Naomi's witness to Ruth that caused her to take Israel's God on as her own. And then it was Ruth's witness to Naomi that brought hope back into her life. Look, you can come here on a Sunday and you might get encouraged by something I say. That's wonderful. But if you don't have a friend with you, you're not going to grow. You're not going to grow. Our growth groups are starting up the week of February 3rd. We're going to be going through the first half of the book of Hebrews, and we're going to have a whole bunch of small groups that are going to meet here at the church and throughout the area. I hope that you get involved in one of those. It's 8 weeks. It's not an endless lifetime commitment. But you can do it, and you just might meet a friend. You just might meet a fellow traveler who is on the same road as you. And we believe that people grow through two things, a connection to God and a connection to other believers. You need spiritually significant relationships in your life if you're going to grow. What else did we learn? Cultural barriers are broken by grace. It's amazing. You have this non-traditional family, and you go into the ancient world. Men are awesome. They're ethnocentric. If you happen to be in the right ethnicity, that's awesome. Race, family. If you have a big family, if you have a lot of heirs, that's important. Who's the hero of this story? An immigrant woman who has nothing. A woman in that day and age, right? Not only that, not an Israelite. All of a sudden, she becomes the hero of the story, this non-traditional family. Grace overshadows all of it. What's the takeaway for that? Well, it's that we shouldn't capitulate to these kind of cultural narratives around us, right? What are the most important things of the lives of the people who live in San Jose and in the Silicon Valley right now? It's money, affluence, the next great app, owning a home. And that's the dominant cultural narrative. Those are the things that people elevate to a position of preeminence in their life. What the scriptures are saying here, and the example of Ruth, the example of Boaz, is that can you make God the preeminent thing in your life, the be-all and end-all? And then there's this radical imperative of discipleship. And in case you missed it, one of the major themes of the book of Ruth is generosity. You've got Ruth, extraordinarily generosity. She's laying her life down for somebody else. And then you've got Boaz, extraordinary generosity. He's not only going to pay their debt and ransom their land back, he's going to essentially give it away. He's going to say, hey, this is for Naomi, and this is to carry on the name of Elimelech. Extremely generous. The original hearers of this word would have seen this hanging in the margins all over the place. And so we can't put conditions on obedience, right? You can't say, okay, well, I'll obey you, God, if I get X, Y, and Z. Because, look, anything on the other side of if, those are your real gods. I'll obey God if my family stays happy and healthy. I'll obey God if my career goes well. I'll obey God if. Anything you put on the other side of if is the thing you're really worshiping. And God says you simply can't do that. He says you can't have me come into your life as a servant. There's this great book, came out probably about 15 years ago, called Blue Like Jazz. And the author's a guy by the name of Donald Miller. And he says, in a lot of Christian circles, we've managed to turn God into a dolphin, where you blow your whistle and he jumps through hoops. And that is the biblical definition of foolishness. It's just simply willful blindness to the way things really are. God doesn't say, look, I'm going to come into your life as a servant. No. It just can't work that way. Look, if he is who the scriptures say he is, there's no way that's going to work. He can't come into your life as a servant. Rather, he says, come into my life as my servant. Give me your life, and I will give you something back that you never could have anticipated. Lay your deadly doing down. Lay it down at Jesus' feet, and he's going to give you a life. He'll give you the life that you would ask for if you had the information that he has. So how you doing with it all? We can close the sermon right now, and you'd be crushed. How you doing with that? Do you have those spiritually significant relationships, people that you're investing in? I mean, really, you only get 6 to 12 opportunities to do this in like a lifetime. Really invest in somebody's life. And there's this radical imperative of discipleship where I'm going to be so selfless and generous. I'll be like Ruth. I'll be like Boaz. I'm going to give of myself. I'm going to sacrifice in jaw-dropping proportions. How you doing? Should we close the sermon now? It'll crush you. Look, if you read the Bible and you see it as principally a book that's about you, it'll crush you. It'll crush you. But if you read it and you see this as a book that's principally about Jesus and who he is and what he did and how he feels about you, oh my goodness, it's going to lift you up. It's going to encourage you. You're not going to be crushed by it. You're going to be set on fire by it. It's going to be like lightning. There's a greater Redeemer. Look, this is great. I was studying this week, and I've taught through this book several times, and each time there's little things that kind of come out, and this is going to blow your mind. In fact, who's done it? Can we get the last verse, verses 13, 14, and 15 up? So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The woman said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a kinsman redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and is better than 7 sons, has given him birth." What? Did you see what happened there? The writer has played a little fast and loose with the law. All of a sudden, it looks like the baby is the Redeemer. And then we find out the very next thing is the genealogy of David. This is the surprise ending of Ruth chapter 4. Anybody reading this, especially, this was probably written during the reign of David. They would have been like, it's David, the one who is going to redeem all Israel, our king, the one that we were hoping for all these years. God's anointed came from this relationship, came from the relationship with this Moabitess woman. What this is pointing to is the child of promise. He will be great in Israel. This was a child, this wasn't born, and it was the Lord caused her to conceive. This wasn't a child that was born from human initiative. This was a child that was born because of the will of God. And it's pointing down the ancestral line of David. If you turn, well, you don't have to turn, go look at it later. Matthew chapter 1, there's the genealogy of Jesus Christ. And there you have Obed is the father of Jesse, and Jesse is the father of David, and all the way down the line. It's really interesting that Matthew includes the name of all these immigrant women. Uriah's wife, Rahab, who happens to be Boaz's mother. He includes all of them. This is pointing to Jesus. If the scriptures are about you, it'll crush you. But if it's about him, it's going to be amazing. And as we sang before this, he wants your heart. He wants your heart more than anything else. He died to see you go free. He loves you in a way you can't even comprehend. Look, when I became a Christian, I expected to have a better life. I got baptized. I prayed the prayer. I got baptized. I said, all right, well, now these blessings are just going to come in. Look, if you love God for the things he provides, you don't really love him. If you love God because of the blessings, if you love God because of his stuff, you don't really love him. Look, my son Caleb, who's asleep, good, because we're going to talk about him. He was the one kid I had born in New York, and he came out swinging. He's got the attitude. And I have a tradition in my house. Like whenever I got to go to the hardware store or Home Depot or something like that, I try to always grab one of the boys and take him with me. There's not a lot of opportunities for those little father and son things. And I have, I don't know if it's a good habit or a bad habit, but I like to spoil him a little bit. If we go to like Home Depot, I'll let him get a little pack of gum. And if we go to Safeway, I'll let him get a little candy bar or something like that. Or those little Nerf pills that you put in water and they turn into a dinosaur. Yeah, some of you got it. So I said to him, hey, Caleb, I got to go to the store. Do you want to come? And what does he say? He's cagey. You going to get me something? He does it like that, too. He does like, yo, you going to get me something? And I'm like, don't you want to spend time with your dad? Don't you love me for me? Or is it just my stuff? If you love God for the things he provides, you don't really love God. But, look what he did. He loves you. He loves you for you. Not the things that you bring to the table. That's the whole nature of grace. That's the gospel. That God loved you so much while you were still a sinner. He sent his son to die for you so that you could have a relationship with him that not even death could impede. He wants you for you. He loves you for you. Can you love him for him? There is a real Redeemer. And he's written in every page of this book. And he is beautiful and he is wonderful. And he loves you to the sky. Can you love him for him? Because when you can do that, when you can divest yourself of all these, well, I can love God if there's anything on the other side of that if, then you don't really love God. And it's not a one and done thing, folks. You got to crucify these things one at a time. And frequently in my life, when I find something that's competing with God for a position of preeminence in my life, I'll deal with that, and then I'll find out there was something else. But this is what we're called to do. Look to Jesus. Look to the cross. If you've ever wondered if God really loved you, just look to the cross. That's why he did it, because he loved you. It was before the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross, it says in Hebrews. Let me pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for Ruth. Father, it's hard for us to imagine all those years ago. You used a young immigrant woman to bring redemption not just to Bethlehem, not just to Israel, but to anyone who would call on the name of your son, Jesus. And Lord, thank you for Boaz, this picture of what you did for us. Not only did you pay our debt, you gave us an inheritance that lasts forever and ever and ever. And God, thank you for Jesus, our true Redeemer. And God, I do pray if there's anyone here this morning who doesn't know you, who hasn't called you Lord, or maybe someone who's assumed that you're far off and impersonal and that you don't know them or care. Lord, I pray in Jesus' name that you would impress it on their hearts. You know their name, everyone's name. You know everything about them. all their darkest secrets, and still you love them to the sky. I pray this in your Son's name. Amen. We're about